The morning my son told me I was a burden, I was standing at his kitchen stove making pancakes for his 3 children. My hands smelled like butter and maple syrup. My lower back had been aching since 5 in the morning, the way it always does now when I stand too long on hard floors. I didn't complain. I just flipped the pancakes and told myself this was what love looked like. I was wrong about that. It took me 14 months to understand just how wrong I was. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a school librarian in a small town in Ohio. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed, and I believed truly, deeply believed that family was the one thing in this world that would never let you down if you gave it enough of yourself. I gave it everything I had. My son is 40 years old. He lives about 2 hours from where I used to live, in a large house in a suburb outside of Columbus with his wife and their 3 kids. A girl who is 9, a boy who is 7, and the youngest, another boy, who had just turned 4 when all of this began. I had always been close with my son, or at least I thought I had been. When he was growing up, he was the kind of kid who left little notes on my pillow when he thought I was having a hard week. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He called me every Sunday, all through his 20s, even when he was busy. So when he called me 2 winters ago and said that his wife had gone back to work full-time, that childcare costs were eating them alive, and that it would mean the world to him if I considered moving in for a while to help with the kids, I didn't hesitate the way maybe I should have. I said yes within the same phone call. Looking back now, I can see all the things I chose not to see back then. I noticed that my daughter-in-law didn't get on the phone to ask me herself. I noticed that my son used the word while the way people use it when they mean something much longer and are hoping you won't ask for a definition. I noticed that there was no mention of what I might need or want, or whether I had any plans of my own for this chapter of my life. But I told myself I was being ungenerous, and I folded up those little observations and put them somewhere I wouldn't find them easily. I rented a small storage unit for most of my furniture. I packed 4 suitcases and a box of books. I gave my neighbor the key to water my plants until I figured out what to do with them. And on a Tuesday in February, I drove 2 hours north and moved into my son's guest bedroom with its cheerful yellow walls and its window that looked out over the backyard. For the first 2 weeks, things felt almost the way I had imagined they would. The children were wonderful. The youngest would come padding into the kitchen before 6 in the morning and climb onto the stool at the counter to watch me make breakfast like it was a show put on just for him. The older 2 were at the age where they still liked having a grandmother close by, still wanted to show me their drawings and tell me complicated plots of movies I had never seen. I drove the 2 older ones to school each morning. I picked them up each afternoon. I made dinner most nights, did the laundry when it piled up, kept the kitchen clean, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and somewhere in between all of that, tried to find a few quiet minutes each evening to sit in my yellow room and read a few pages of whatever book I was working through. I told myself I was useful. I told myself this was what I had come here to do. The shift happened slowly enough that I almost didn't notice it happening. My daughter-in-law started leaving notes on the kitchen counter in the morning's grocery lists, sure, but also things like, "Can you please make sure the playroom is straightened before you pick the kids up and the bathrooms haven't been done this week?" Not questions, not requests, really. More like memos, reminders of things that had apparently become my responsibilities without any conversation I could recall having. My son would come home from work and move through the house the way water moves through a clean pipe, easy, unbothered, heading straight toward the couch or the TV room or wherever he was going. He would say, "Thanks, Mom," sometimes when dinner was on the table, the same way you thank a restaurant server, present and pleasant but not quite personal. I told myself he was tired. I told myself everyone was tired. Around month 4, I made the mistake of mentioning my back. We were at dinner, all 6 of us at the table, and I had made a chicken casserole that had taken me the better part of the afternoon. I shifted in my chair and said something like, I might need to take it a little easier tomorrow. My back's been giving me trouble again. I wasn't asking for anything. I wasn't asking to be let out of anything. I was just saying it the way you say things at a family dinner table, the way I had assumed we were still a family at a table. My daughter-in-law looked up from her plate. She didn't say anything right away. But that evening, after the kids were in bed, she and my son had a conversation in their bedroom that I wasn't meant to hear, and the walls in that house are thinner than anyone seemed to realize. I heard my daughter-in-law say that I had been less helpful lately. I heard her say that she hadn't gone back to work full-time to come home and still have to manage everything. I heard my son say, quietly, I'll talk to her. He never did talk to me. But things changed in small ways after that. My daughter-in-law started leaving the grocery lists longer, started adding tasks to them that had nothing to do with groceries. Could I also pick up her dry cleaning? Could I also drop off a package at the post office? Could I also please call the pediatrician's office because she'd been meaning to schedule the youngest's checkup? I did all of it. I don't know why I did all of it, except that I kept hoping that if I was good enough, helpful enough, easy enough to have around, we would somehow find our way back to something warmer. The back pain got worse through the summer. It always does in humidity. Some mornings I was stiff in a way that made getting down on the floor to play with the youngest genuinely difficult. And I felt a complicated guilt about that, the kind that comes from not being able to give something you dearly wish you could. I mentioned it to my son one evening when his wife was out, just the two of us, the way it used to be, sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were down. I said, I think I might need to see a doctor about my back. It's really been limiting me. He nodded. He looked at his phone. He said, yeah, you should do that. I waited for something else. Some follow-up. Some "Are you okay, Mom?" The way the boy who used to leave notes on my pillow would have asked. It didn't come. I made my own appointment. I drove myself. I sat in the waiting room alone and answered the intake forms, and drove myself home and made dinner and didn't tell anyone where I had been. By month 8, I had been moved out of the yellow guest room. They didn't announce it as a move, exactly. My daughter-in-law mentioned, carefully and with a great deal of diplomatic language, that her sister might be coming to visit at some point, and it would be nice to have the guest room available. She said there was a perfectly good space on the lower level that she thought I might actually prefer more private, she said. More quiet. The lower level was the basement. It was finished, I will say that. There was carpet and drywall and a small bathroom. But the 2 small windows near the ceiling faced the side of the house where the air conditioning unit ran, and the whole space had a dampness to it that you felt in your joints by morning. I set up my 4 suitcases. I put my books on a shelf my son installed for me, and I thanked him for installing it because I was still doing that, still finding things to be grateful for on the surface while something underneath quietly went to work. My daughter-in-law's sister never came to visit, as far as I could tell. I kept cooking. I kept cleaning. I kept driving the children, kept doing the laundry, kept crossing items off the counter memos. I went to physical therapy for my back on Tuesday mornings, and I scheduled it early enough that I would still be home in time to drive the kids to school. I did not want anyone to be inconvenienced. There was a woman at my physical therapy office who had a way of asking how you were doing that made it sound like she actually wanted to know. Her name was Patricia, and she was about my age. And she always had the kind of laugh that fills a room without trying to. We started talking during the waiting room stretches, and eventually we started talking over coffee in the small cafe across the street after our appointments. Patricia was the first person I told the whole story to. Not a version of it with the sharp edges filed down, the real one. She listened the entire time. When I finished, she sat with it quietly for a moment, the way someone does when they are actually thinking, instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. Then she said, "When did you last do something just because you wanted to?" I opened my mouth and then I closed it again. I couldn't answer her. I genuinely could not find the answer. I drove home that day, and the house was empty. Kids at school, son at work, daughter-in-law at the office, and I stood in that big, clean kitchen that I wiped down every single day, and I looked at it like I was seeing it for the first time. The handprints I had cleaned off the cabinet doors, the dish rack I had emptied that morning, the grocery list already started on the counter in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, waiting for me. I sat down at the kitchen table and I stayed there for a long time. I want to be honest about something, because the question I get most often, or at least the question I imagine people asking, is why I didn't leave sooner. And the answer is not simple, but I'll try. Part of it was love. Real love, not confused love. I loved my grandchildren with the kind of love that makes your chest ache when you think about not seeing them every day. Part of it was fear. 64 years old, most of my furniture in a storage unit, my old apartment long since re-rented. Where exactly does that woman go? And part of it, if I am being fully honest, was hope. I kept waiting for my son to come back, the one who left notes on my pillow. I kept thinking that if I stayed, if I was patient, if I did not ask for too much, he would look up from whatever he had gotten absorbed into and see me again. I was wrong about that too. It was a Saturday in late October when everything finally broke open, quietly and completely, the way ice gives way at the end of a long winter. My daughter-in-law wanted to take the kids to her mother's for the weekend. My son was going to a college friend's birthday gathering. They were going separately, which had become a pattern I had stopped commenting on. Before they each left, my daughter-in-law handed me a list of things she would like done while the house was quiet. Deep clean the oven. Reorganize the pantry. Wipe down the baseboards in the upstairs hallway. Wash and fold the pile of bedding in the laundry room. She said it lightly. In passing, the way you mention something to a person whose job it is to do those things. I said, fine. I said I would take care of it. My son stopped in the kitchen doorway on his way out. He looked relaxed, the way people look when they're heading somewhere they actually want to be. He said, "Hey, Mom, list of stuff we need done is on the counter." As though his wife hadn't already given it to me. As though it needed saying twice. I said, "I saw it." He started toward the door, and something in me, some long, tired part of me that had been holding on very tightly for a very long time, just let go a little. I said, "I was actually thinking I might not get to all of it this weekend. My back has been worse this week." He stopped. He turned around. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before, or maybe one I had seen but chosen not to recognize. It was the look of someone who has been quietly calculating what you are worth to them and has arrived at a number. He said, "Mom, we brought you here to help. That's the whole point." I said, "I know, and I've been helping for over a year," he said. "So then what's the problem?" I said, "My back. I just told you. I'm not able to do everything on this list in a weekend." He looked at the counter. He looked back at me. And then he said it, not loudly, not cruelly in the way of someone who is trying to hurt you. He said it the way you state a fact that seems obvious to you. He said, "If you can't keep up with what we need, then I honestly don't know what you're contributing here." I stood very still. He picked up his keys off the hook by the door. He said, "Just do what you can," and he left. The door clicked shut. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. Long enough for the refrigerator to cycle through a full hum and quiet down. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift from the back window across the floor to the cabinet doors. I thought about my husband, who died believing this son would be a good man. I thought about the 31 years I spent in a library teaching children that stories matter. I thought about the notes under my pillow and the Sunday phone calls and every version of my son I had loved before this one. I grieved them, all of them, right there at the kitchen counter on a Saturday afternoon. And then I went downstairs and I took out 2 of my suitcases. I didn't pack everything. I packed what was mine in the truest sense, my books, my winter coat, the small jewelry box my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, my good cardigan, the photographs I had framed and set on the basement shelf. I packed what I could carry in 2 trips to my car. I moved quietly. The house was empty, but I still moved quietly, out of a habit of not disturbing anyone that I was only now recognizing for what it was. Before I came up from the basement the last time, I sat on the edge of the stripped bed and I took out my phone and I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. My voice only cracked once, right at the beginning, and then it steadied. She said, "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" I said I was going to drive to a motel and figure things out in the morning. She said, "Absolutely not. She had a guest room, and it had been empty for 2 years, and I would stay with her as long as I needed. I want to tell you what it felt like to be offered a soft place to land after 14 months of being treated like a piece of furniture. There isn't a clean way to say it. I just sat on that stripped mattress, and I let myself feel it for a minute that someone had offered without me asking, without conditions, without a list on the counter. I wrote a note for my son. Not a long one. I didn't explain myself, or justify myself, or apologize. I wrote, "I've gone. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Please tell the children I love them, and I'll see them soon. Mom." I left it on the kitchen counter, next to the list that would not be finished that weekend. I drove to Patricia's house with 2 suitcases in my back seat and the windows down, even though it was almost November, because I wanted to feel the cold air. I wanted to feel something that was simply the world being the world, indifferent and clean, and not requiring anything from me. Patricia had soup on the stove by the time I got there. She didn't fuss over me. She set a bowl in front of me and sat down across the table, and we talked about ordinary things. A book she was reading, a ridiculous thing her cat had done that morning, and I ate the soup, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, like a person sitting in a room where she was genuinely welcome. My son called 3 times that evening. I let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. That wasn't weakness. Letting yourself get steady before you speak is not the same thing as running away. I called him back 2 days later. He was calmer than I expected, or maybe quieter. He said he hadn't realized things had gotten to that point. He said he was sorry things got heated. He did not say, "I am sorry for what I said." He did not say, "I am sorry for how long this went on." He said he hoped we could talk when I was ready. I told him we would talk. I told him I loved him. And I told him that the conversation we needed to have was going to involve some things changing, and that those changes were not negotiable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, Mom, I don't know yet what the future holds with my son. I know that I have found a small apartment 20 minutes from Patricia's house, and that I move in at the end of the month. I know that I have rearranged my storage unit twice already, getting reacquainted with my own furniture like old friends I've been away from too long. I know that I see my grandchildren on weekends now, by my own choice and on my own terms, and that the youngest still climbs into my lap and puts his hand on my face the way little ones do when they are checking that you are real. I know that I sleep without back pain most mornings because I am not on a damp basement floor anymore. I know that I drink coffee at my own pace. I know that there is no list on my counter in anyone else's handwriting. I spent 64 years learning to give. I am spending whatever comes next, learning something harder, which is that giving is only love when it is freely offered and genuinely received, and that a woman who has spent a lifetime caring for others does not owe the rest of her days to people who have forgotten how to see her. You raised your children. You showed up. You loved generously, maybe more generously than was wise, maybe more than was returned. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to take up exactly as much space as you need, not because you've earned it, not because you've done enough, but because you are a person, and that has always been reason enough. Don't wait for someone to remind you of that. I waited too long. Please don't make the same mistake I did.